The microphone screeched sharply as it was yanked from her trembling hands. "Get her off the stage, now!" The words cut through the grand auditorium like a blade. Ava Robinson stood frozen under the blinding white stage lights, her heart pounding so violently it felt as though it might shatter her ribs from the inside. Her palms were slick with sweat, her fingers still curled around nothing, as if the microphone were still there. It was. It had been taken, just like her dignity, right in front of hundreds of people. A tall man in a tailored charcoal suit stepped closer, his jaw clenched, his lips curled in open disgust. His conference badge swung proudly against his chest. Event Director Harold Klein. "You don't belong here," he barked into his own microphone, his voice amplified and merciless. "This stage is for professionals, not whatever this is." A murmur rippled through the crowd, whispers, gasps. The soft click of phones being lifted, cameras rolling, Ava's breath caught in her throat. I was invited," she said softly, her voice barely audible now without the mic. "They told me to share my story. I'm on the program. My name is—" "Your name doesn't matter," Harold snapped, cutting her off with a sharp wave of his hand. "What matters is that you lied your way in here. Look at you. Do you honestly expect anyone to believe you're a keynote guest?" His eyes swept over her slowly, cruelly. Her simple navy blue dress, ironed twice that morning but still unmistakably modest. Her worn flats. Her tightly coiled hair pulled into a low bun because she couldn't afford a stylist. The way she stood, straight-backed but shaking, proud but terrified, every flaw, every difference magnified under the lights. Ava swallowed hard. "Sir, please," she whispered. "I practiced this speech for weeks. I was told my story mattered." That did it. Harold let out a short, humorless laugh that echoed through the hall. "Story?" he scoffed loudly. "This is a global leadership summit, not some charity open mic night. We have billion-dollar investors in this room, world leaders, innovators, not—" He paused deliberately, lowering his voice with venom. "People looking for sympathy." The crowd went quiet, painfully quiet. Ava felt it then, the heat behind her eyes, the familiar sting she had fought her whole life not to show. Her lips parted, but no sound came out. Her chest rose and fell in shallow, uneven breaths. From the front row, someone whispered, "This is uncomfortable." From the back, another voice muttered, "Why would they let her up there?" A phone camera zoomed in. Ava's hands trembled harder now. She clasped them together as if holding herself in one piece. "I'm not asking for sympathy," she said, her voice cracking despite her efforts. "I was asked to speak about resilience, about surviving, about building something from nothing." Harold leaned closer, lowering his voice just enough to make it feel intimate and cruel. "You people always say that," he said. "But let's be honest, this room wasn't built for you." A collective intake of breath swept through the audience. Some looked away, some stared frozen, no one stood up. Two security guards began moving toward the stage. Ava noticed them out of the corner of her eye. Her heart dropped. "Please," she said again, softer now, "just let me finish, just 5 minutes." Harold turned to the guards and gestured sharply. "Escort her out, we're already behind schedule." One of the guards hesitated. "Sir, she does appear to be on the agenda. Do not question me," Harold snapped. "Remove her, now." The guard's hand lightly touched Ava's elbow. That was the moment it broke her. The humiliation wasn't just public, it was complete, absolute, stripped bare in front of strangers who would forget her face by tomorrow but remember the spectacle. Her vision blurred with tears she refused to let fall. She stepped back, shaking her head. "I didn't do anything wrong," she whispered, more to herself than anyone else. The audience sat frozen in their seats, the weight of the moment pressing down on them. A few people shifted uncomfortably. A woman in the third row covered her mouth. A man in a designer suit leaned toward his companion and murmured something inaudible. Still, no one spoke. No one defended her. And then, from the far left side of the hall, someone stood up, slowly, deliberately. The man didn't rush. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't look angry. But the moment he rose, something changed. He was tall, silver-haired, dressed simply in a navy blazer with no visible badge. His posture was calm, unshaken. His eyes, sharp, observant, and deeply human, were fixed on Ava. Then they shifted to Harold. "Excuse me," the man said calmly, his voice cutting through the silence like a steady bell. "Before you remove her, I think you should hear the rest of her story." Harold turned, irritation flashing across his face. "And who are you supposed to be?" he sneered. The man didn't answer immediately. He looked back at Ava, really looked at her. The fear she was trying to hide, the courage it took just to stand there, a faint, knowing sadness crossed his face. Then he smiled just slightly and said, "Because I already know who she is." The room went dead silent, every breath held, every phone forgotten. Ava looked at him, confused. Harold scoffed. "Sit down, sir, you're interrupting." The man remained standing, unmoved, unintimidated, and for the first time since Ava stepped onto that stage, someone was on her side. Question of the day, have you ever been judged or humiliated before anyone bothered to hear your story? Tell us in the comments and let us know where you're watching from today. Because what happened next, no one in that room was prepared for. And to understand why this moment mattered so much, why this humiliation was only the beginning, let's go back to how this story truly began this morning. The day had begun long before the sun rose. Ava Robinson woke to the sound of coughing. It came from the other side of the thin bedroom wall, deep, rattling coughs that scraped the silence of the early morning like broken glass. Ava's eyes flew open instantly. For a split second, she lay still, counting the seconds between each breath she heard, her heart already tight with worry. "Mom," she called softly. The coughing slowed, then stopped. "I'm okay, baby," her mother's voice answered weakly. "Just give me a minute." Ava exhaled, though the knot in her chest didn't loosen. She swung her legs off the narrow bed and pulled on her worn slippers. The floor was cold beneath her feet. The heater hadn't worked properly in years, but she didn't flinch. Cold was familiar. So was fear. The small apartment they lived in sat above a closed-down laundromat on the east side of the city, in a neighborhood most people only drove past with locked doors and judgment in their eyes. The paint on the walls peeled like old scabs. The ceiling leaked when it rained. The smell of damp concrete never fully went away. But it was home. Ava moved quietly down the short hallway, past the tiny kitchen where last night's dishes were stacked neatly to dry. She paused for a moment to straighten a chair that had been knocked slightly out of place, an unconscious habit she developed years ago: fix what you can, control what's in front of you. Her mother, Lillian Robinson, sat on the edge of her bed, clutching her chest, eyes closed as she tried to steady her breathing. She was only 52, but illness had aged her far beyond her years. Cancer had a way of doing that, stealing color, strength, and time. Ava knelt in front of her. "Did you take your inhaler?" Lillian nodded slowly. "Yes, it just takes a while." Ava reached out, wrapping her mother's hands in her own. They were cold, too cold. "I'm making tea," Ava said gently. "The ginger one you like." Lillian smiled faintly. "You remembered." "I always remember." That was Ava in a sentence. At 26 years old, Ava carried herself with a quiet strength that came from years of responsibility no one ever volunteered for. She was slender but resilient, her face soft yet marked by an awareness far older than her age. Her eyes, deep brown and endlessly expressive, held both kindness and exhaustion in equal measure. She had learned early that life didn't pause just because you were tired. While the kettle warmed, Ava glanced at the calendar taped crookedly to the refrigerator. Today's date was circled in blue ink. Today, speaking event, 8:00 a.m. She stared at the words for a long moment. This was supposed to be a good day. The kettle whistled. Ava poured the water carefully, added honey she'd been saving for special moments, and carried the mug back to her mother. "You don't have to go if you're nervous," Lillian said quietly, accepting the tea. "I know you hate crowds." Ava shook her head. "I have to go." "Why?" Ava hesitated, then smiled softly. "Because someone out there might need to hear that surviving is possible." Lillian studied her daughter's face, the determination, the hope she tried so hard to protect. "You always try to save everyone," she said. Ava shrugged. "Someone saved me once." That someone had never known it. After making sure her mother was settled, Ava returned to her room to get dressed. She chose her only formal dress, smoothing the fabric with her hands like it might erase its age. She had washed it the night before and hung it carefully on the doorframe to dry. The hem was slightly frayed, but it was clean, presentable, dignified. She braided her hair slowly, carefully, the way her mother had taught her as a child. Each movement was deliberate, grounding, centering. As she looked at herself in the cracked mirror, doubt crept in uninvited. "Do I really belong there?" The question echoed louder than she liked. Ava had grown up being told, directly and indirectly, where she didn't belong: in advanced classrooms, in corporate offices, in spaces that required confidence money often bought. Still, she stood taller, because her story mattered. She had dropped out of college at 19 to care for her mother after the diagnosis. She had worked 2 jobs, cleaning offices at night, serving coffee by day, while applying for grants, assistance programs, and anything that might keep them afloat. She had failed more times than she could count. And yet, she had been invited to speak, not because of connections, not because of wealth, but because a small nonprofit had heard her story at a community panel months earlier. They had seen something in her words, something raw, honest, powerful. They told her she was inspiring. Ava had cried when she received the email. Before leaving, she knelt beside her mother once more. I'll be back before noon, Ava said. I'll call during the break. Lillian squeezed her hand. I'm proud of you. Those words filled Ava's chest more than any applause ever could. Outside, the morning air was sharp. The bus stop was already crowded with workers heading to jobs that barely paid enough to survive. Ava stood quietly, clutching her tote bag to her chest, rehearsing her opening line in her head. My name is Ava Robinson, and this is what resilience looks like. She didn't know it yet, but in just a few hours, her resilience would be tested in ways she never imagined. And the world she was about to step into would not be gentle. The bus lurched forward with a low groan, pulling away from the curb as Ava tightened her grip on the metal pole above her head. The city passed by in fragments through the smudged window, brick buildings, shuttered storefronts, a billboard promising luxury to people who would never afford it. Her phone vibrated in her coat pocket. Ava frowned slightly and slipped it out. Pharmacy, 2 missed calls. Her stomach dropped. She called back immediately. Robinson Residence, she said quietly, trying to keep her voice steady. Miss Robinson, the pharmacist said on the other end, his tone apologetic but firm. I'm sorry to bother you again, but your mother's prescription refill. I know, Ava interrupted softly. I was going to come by today. There's a problem, he said. The insurance won't cover the new dosage. The balance is $864. The number landed like a physical blow. Ava closed her eyes. That can't be right, she whispered. I'm afraid it is, he replied gently. We've already applied all available discounts. Without payment, we won't be able to release the medication, and based on the doctor's notes, she really shouldn't miss another dose. Ava's chest tightened. She pressed her forehead against the cool glass of the bus window, the city blurring as her eyes filled with tears. Please, she said, her voice barely holding together. Just give me until the end of the day. I'll figure something out. There was a pause. I'll hold it until closing, the pharmacist said. That's the best I can do. The call ended. Ava didn't move. $864. She had $57 in her checking account. Her second job paycheck wouldn't come for another week. She had already sold her grandmother's ring last month to cover rent. She had applied for emergency assistance twice, both denied. There was nowhere left to turn. Her phone buzzed again, a text from her landlord. Rent reminder. Late fees begin tomorrow. Her breath hitched. The bus stopped suddenly, jostling her back to the present. A child laughed somewhere behind her. Someone complained loudly about traffic. Life continued indifferent. Ava stepped off the bus near the conference center, her legs feeling heavier with every step. This speaking engagement, this chance, suddenly felt like more than just an opportunity. It felt like the last door not yet slammed shut. The nonprofit had mentioned a small honorarium, nothing guaranteed, nothing promised. But maybe someone in that room would listen, someone would care. Someone might connect her to help, resources, something. She hated herself for thinking that way. She had promised herself she wouldn't beg, wouldn't reduce her story to desperation. But desperation didn't ask permission. As she approached the towering glass building, her phone rang again. This time it was her mother. Ava answered instantly. Mom, I didn't want to worry you, Lillian said, her voice strained. But I'm feeling dizzy. And my chest feels tight again. Ava stopped walking. I'm coming home, she said immediately. No, Lillian replied quickly. Ava, please don't. You've been working toward this day for months. Your medicine, I know, Lillian said softly, but you can't keep putting your life on hold for me. Ava's throat burned. You're my life. There was silence on the line, thick with love and fear. I'll be okay for a few hours, Lillian said finally. Go, speak. Let the world hear you. Ava nodded even though her mother couldn't see her. Okay, but if anything changes, you call me immediately. I promise. The call ended. Ava stood there for a long moment, staring up at the massive building before her. People streamed past her in tailored suits and polished shoes, badges swinging confidently from their necks. She felt invisible and exposed. Inside her bag was a folded printout of her speech. She had rewritten it 3 times the night before, her hands shaking with exhaustion. She had chosen every word carefully, not to inspire pity, but to share truth. But now the words blurred together in her mind. What if this was a mistake? What if she failed and lost even this small chance to save her mother? Ava ducked into the restroom near the entrance and locked herself into a stall. She pressed her fist to her mouth, stifling a sob as tears finally spilled over. I don't know what to do, she whispered to no one. Her reflection stared back at her from the cracked mirror. Eyes red, face pale, fear written plainly across her features. She wiped her cheeks quickly. Get it together. She couldn't fall apart now. Not here, not today, because today wasn't just about her story. It was about survival. Straightening her shoulders, Ava took one last deep breath and stepped out of the restroom. She had made her decision. No matter the cost, no matter the risk of being judged or humiliated, she would step forward. She would speak, because doing nothing was no longer an option, and somewhere deep inside her, beneath the fear and doubt, a small, stubborn hope refused to die. The doors to the conference center slid open with a soft hiss, releasing a wave of cool, conditioned air that carried the faint scent of polished wood and expensive cologne. Ava paused just outside the entrance, her hand hovering inches from the glass as if crossing the threshold required more courage than she possessed. Inside, everything gleamed. Marble floors reflected the overhead lights like still water. Massive banners hung from the ceiling, emblazoned with sleek logos and words like innovation, leadership, and global impact. Voices echoed confidently through the vast lobby, measured, assured, powerful. Ava adjusted the strap of her tote bag on her shoulder and stepped inside. Her shoes made a soft, almost apologetic sound against the marble as she walked. She was suddenly acutely aware of everything about herself: the simplicity of her dress, the lack of a designer label, the way her badge felt too light against her chest. She approached the registration desk, where two women in crisp blazers typed rapidly on tablets. "Name?" one of them asked without looking up. "Ava Robinson," Ava replied. The woman paused, then scanned the screen, her eyebrows lifted slightly. "Oh, yes, you're here as a guest speaker." The word guest landed strangely, as if it didn't quite belong to Ava. "Room C," the woman continued. "You'll be on after the lunch break." Ava nodded. "Thank you." As she walked away, she heard a whisper behind her. "Is that her? I thought she'd be older." Ava didn't turn around. She followed the signs toward Room C, passing clusters of attendees engaged in animated conversations about venture capital, emerging markets, and billion-dollar deals. Their laughter was easy, unburdened. Her own thoughts were anything but, what if they can tell I don't belong? What if they see right through me? Her phone buzzed again, a text from her mother: "Still okay. Watching TV. Don't rush. Love you." Ava pressed the phone to her chest for a moment, drawing strength from the simple words. Room C was already half full when she slipped inside. Rows of chairs faced a wide stage, currently occupied by a panel of speakers discussing disruptive growth in emerging economies. Ava took a seat near the aisle, clutching her notes tightly. She tried to focus on the panel, but her mind kept drifting to the pharmacy, to the number 864, to the clock ticking louder with every passing minute. She glanced around the room. Everyone else seemed so certain, so comfortable. They leaned back in their seats, crossed their legs, nodded thoughtfully. Ava sat on the edge of her chair, spine straight as if bracing for impact. A break was announced. People stood, stretching, heading toward the refreshments table. Ava remained seated, taking slow breaths, rehearsing her opening line again. "My name is Ava Robinson." A man in a dark suit stopped in front of her. "You're the speaker after lunch, right?" he asked. Ava looked up, startled. "Yes, I am." He nodded, polite but distant. "Good luck." "Thank you," she said, offering a small smile. He walked away. The words echoed in her mind. Good luck. She wondered if luck was what she needed, or mercy. When the break ended, the room filled again. The panel wrapped up, applause filled the space, and then the moderator stepped forward. "And now," she announced brightly, "we have a very special guest, someone whose story represents resilience in its truest form. Please welcome Ava Robinson." The applause was polite, scattered. Ava stood. Her legs felt unsteady as she walked toward the stage steps. Each step felt heavier than the last, as if the weight of her entire life pressed down on her shoulders. She climbed onto the stage. The lights were blinding. For a moment she couldn't see the audience, just a sea of white light and shadows beyond it. She blinked, trying to adjust, her heart pounding so loudly she was sure the microphone would pick it up. She reached the podium and set her notes down, her hands trembling slightly. She took a breath, and then a voice cut through the room. "Excuse me." Ava froze. From the side of the stage, a man in a charcoal suit stepped forward, Harold Klein. He leaned toward the moderator, whispering sharply. The moderator's smile faltered. "What seems to be the problem?" she asked quietly. Harold's gaze flicked to Ava, then back to the moderator. "There's been a mistake," he said. "She's not on the approved list." Ava's stomach dropped. "I what?" she whispered. Harold turned to her, his expression already hardening. "You'll need to step aside," he said coolly. "We can't have unauthorized speakers." "I am authorized," Ava said, her voice shaking. "I was invited." "I have emails." "Not now," Harold snapped. "We'll sort this out later." The moderator looked uncertain. "Harold, I'm pretty sure." I'll handle it, he said firmly. The audience shifted, murmurs beginning to rise. Ava stood there, her heart racing, fear clawing at her chest. This wasn't how it was supposed to happen. She glanced out at the crowd, searching for something, anything that might ground her. Instead, she saw faces already beginning to judge. Harold gestured sharply toward the steps. Off the stage, he said. And as Ava took a step back, humiliation washing over her like a cold wave, she had no idea that this moment, this terrifying pause at the edge of everything, was about to change her life forever. Ava's heel caught slightly on the edge of the stage as she stepped back, and for a split second, she nearly lost her balance. A quiet gasp rippled through the audience. She steadied herself, gripping the podium just long enough to regain control, then released it as if it had burned her. Her face flushed, not from the heat of the lights, but from the sudden, crushing awareness that every eye in the room was fixed on her. Harold Klein didn't notice or didn't care. He stepped forward, planting himself between Ava and the audience like a barrier, his posture rigid with authority. He leaned toward the microphone, his voice sharp and clipped. "Ladies and gentlemen," he said, forcing a thin smile, "we're experiencing a brief scheduling issue. Please remain seated." Ava turned toward him, her heart pounding. "Sir, please," she said quietly. "There's been a misunderstanding. I was invited to speak. I have confirmation." Harold didn't even look at her. "You were invited to attend," he said flatly, "not to speak." "That's not true," Ava insisted, her voice rising slightly despite her efforts to stay calm. She reached into her tote bag, fumbling for her phone. "I can show you the email, the nonprofit." Harold finally turned to face her. Up close, his expression was worse, cold, dismissive, laced with something darker. "Do you have any idea how many people try to sneak into events like this?" he said under his breath. "Everyone has a story. Everyone thinks theirs deserves a stage." Ava felt as if he'd slapped her. "I didn't sneak in," she said. "I checked in at the desk. They gave me a badge. They directed me here." Harold glanced briefly at her badge, then scoffed. "Those interns will hand out badges to anyone who looks lost enough," he said loudly. A few people in the front row shifted uncomfortably. Someone coughed. Ava felt her throat tighten. "I'm not lost," she said, her voice trembling now. "I know exactly why I'm here." Harold's eyes narrowed. "And why is that?" he asked, his tone dripping with skepticism. Ava took a breath, summoning every ounce of courage she had left. "Because I was asked to share my experience," she said. "Because people like me, people who come from nothing, don't often get invited into rooms like this, and when we do, it matters." A murmur ran through the crowd. Harold laughed, a short, sharp sound that echoed cruelly. "People like you," he repeated. "Exactly." The words hung in the air, heavy and unmistakable. Ava's chest burned. "What is that supposed to mean?" she asked. Harold turned slightly, addressing the audience now as much as her. "It means," he said, "that this conference has standards. We can't just hand the microphone to anyone with a sob story and call it leadership." Ava felt the room tilt. "This isn't a sob story," she said, her voice breaking despite her efforts. "It's my life." "And that's the problem," Harold snapped. "Your life doesn't qualify you to stand here." A hush fell over the room. Some people stared at the floor. Others watched intently, eyes flicking between Ava and Harold. A few phones were raised now, discreetly recording. Ava's hands shook at her sides. "I worked hard to be here," she said. "I took time off work. I practiced this speech because I believed." "You believed wrong," Harold interrupted. "This stage is not a charity platform." Ava felt tears sting her eyes. She blinked rapidly, refusing to let them fall. "I'm not asking for charity," she whispered. "I'm asking for respect." Harold's lips curled slightly. "Respect is earned," he said, "and frankly, you haven't earned it here." The words landed like stones. Ava glanced out at the audience again, searching for a friendly face. Someone to say something, anything. She found none. The moderator stood off to the side, frozen, her hands clasped tightly together. The security guards lingered near the steps, watching, waiting. Harold gestured toward them. "Please escort her out," he said, his voice final. One of the guards stepped forward, hesitating. "Sir," he said quietly, "she says she was invited." Harold shot him a glare. "Do your job," he snapped. The guard turned to Ava, his expression apologetic. "Ma'am, I'm going to need you to come with me." Ava nodded slowly, her body moving on instinct even as her mind screamed. "I'm sorry," she said, though she wasn't sure to whom. As she took a step toward the stairs, Harold leaned in one last time. "Next time," he said softly, cruelly, "know your place before you embarrass yourself." That did it. The tears spilled over, hot and unstoppable. Ava's shoulders shook as she fought to keep her composure, her face burning with shame. She had never felt so small, so exposed. The audience watched in silence as she descended the steps, her dreams unraveling with each one. and still no one spoke. No one intervened. The confrontation had ended, but the damage was done. Ava reached the bottom of the stage and stopped, her head bowed, her breath coming in shallow gasps. This was what judgment without mercy felt like. And as she stood there, broken and humiliated, she didn't know that she was standing at the edge of her lowest moment, with no idea that someone in that silent crowd had been watching everything and was about to step forward. Ava stood at the foot of the stage, the weight of the room pressing down on her like a physical force. The applause that usually followed a speaker never came. Instead, there was only silence. Not the gentle, respectful kind, but the heavy, suffocating silence that followed something everyone had witnessed and no one wanted to claim responsibility for. It wrapped around Ava's chest, making it hard to breathe. She could feel the eyes on her, some filled with curiosity, some with discomfort, some with quiet agreement. The security guard waited beside her, shifting his weight, unsure whether to hurry her along or give her a moment. Ava wiped her cheeks quickly with the back of her hand, embarrassed by the tears she couldn't control. "I'm sorry," she whispered again, her voice barely audible. She wasn't even sure why she was apologizing anymore. Harold Klein had already turned his back on her, speaking quietly with the moderator as if nothing of consequence had just happened. His laughter drifted faintly across the stage, sharp and dismissive. Ava felt something inside her crack. All her life she had learned to endure, to swallow her pride, to keep her head down, to survive in silence. But standing there, stripped of her voice in front of hundreds of strangers, something broke loose. "I just wanted to tell my story," she said softly, her words floating into the void. "That's all." No one responded. Her chest tightened painfully, each breath shallow and uneven. She pressed her hand to her sternum, trying to steady herself. "Mom needs her medicine. I can't fail today." The thought made the humiliation cut even deeper. The guard cleared his throat gently. "Ma'am," he said, "we should go." Ava nodded. She took one step forward, then another. Each step felt like walking through mud, her legs heavy with defeat. She kept her gaze fixed on the floor, unable to bear the weight of the audience's stares. A woman in the second row shifted uncomfortably, her lips pressed together. A man nearby glanced at his phone, already disengaging. Life moved on. Ava reached the aisle leading out of the room and stopped. Her body betrayed her. Her knees buckled slightly, and she grabbed the back of a chair to steady herself. A sob escaped her lips before she could stop it, raw, broken, and painfully human. "I'm sorry," she whispered again, her voice shaking. "I didn't mean to cause trouble." The words tasted bitter. She had done nothing wrong, and yet she felt like she was the one who should disappear. The guard placed a hand lightly on her arm. "It's okay," he said quietly. "You didn't deserve that." Ava looked up at him, surprised. His eyes were kind. "Thank you," she said, though the words felt hollow. As they walked toward the exit, the sound of quiet conversation began to rise behind them, the room slowly returning to its scheduled programming. A new speaker was being prepared. A new voice would soon fill the space Ava had been denied. She reached the doorway. This was it. The end. She would go home. She would sit beside her mother's bed and pretend everything was fine. She would find another way, somehow, to get the medicine. She always did, even if it meant losing the last piece of herself in the process. She paused, her hand hovering over the door handle. Her phone vibrated in her bag. Ava ignored it. She couldn't bear to hear bad news right now. Harold's voice echoed from the stage behind her, loud and dismissive. "Let's move on," he said. "We're already behind schedule." That was the moment Ava truly hit rock bottom. Not when she was insulted, not when she was humiliated, but when she realized how easily the world could erase her. She took a breath, one last attempt to steady herself before stepping out of the room forever. And then a chair scraped loudly against the floor. The sound cut through the murmurs like a thunderclap. Ava froze. The guard turned his head. The audience fell silent again, not with discomfort this time, but with surprise. Slow, deliberate footsteps echoed through the aisle. Ava turned. A man was walking toward her from the middle rows. He moved with calm certainty, unhurried, as if the chaos of the moment had no power over him. He was tall, with neatly combed silver hair and a presence that drew attention without demanding it. His suit was simple but impeccably tailored, his expression composed. He stopped a few feet away from Ava. "Miss," he said gently. Ava looked up, confused, her eyes still wet with tears. "Yes," she whispered. He offered her a small, reassuring smile. "I believe," he said calmly, "you were just removed from a stage you were meant to stand on." The room went completely still. Harold turned sharply from the podium, irritation flashing across his face. "Sir," he called out, "please return to your seat. This does not concern you." The man didn't look at him. His attention remained fixed on Ava. Are you okay? He asked softly. Ava hesitated, then shook her head. No, she admitted. Something in the man's eyes shifted, sympathy, understanding, and something else Ava couldn't quite place. He nodded slowly, as if confirming something he already knew. Then, he said, turning at last to face the stage, I think it does concern me. The balance of the room changed. No one knew it yet, but the silence that had crushed Ava moments ago was about to turn against the man who caused it. The man's voice was not loud. It didn't need to be. In a room full of powerful voices, his calm carried a weight that silenced them all. Harold Klein straightened, irritation etched across his face. Sir, he said sharply, this is a private event. If you have an issue, you can take it up with staff later. Right now, we need to move on. The man didn't raise his voice or argue. He took one step closer to Ava. Before anyone moves on, he said evenly, I'd like to understand why a scheduled speaker was just humiliated and removed. A ripple of tension moved through the audience. Harold scoffed. She was not scheduled. She misrepresented herself. Ava flinched at the words. The man glanced back at her, then returned his gaze to Harold. His eyes were sharp now, though his expression remained composed. Is that so? He asked. Yes, Harold replied quickly. She had no authorization to be on that stage. The man nodded once. Then it should be very easy to verify. Harold hesitated. That's not necessary. On the contrary, the man said calmly, it's essential. The security guards shifted uneasily. Ava felt her heart pounding again, but this time something else stirred beneath the fear, hope. The man turned to her gently. Miss, he said, did you receive an invitation to speak today? Yes, Ava said, her voice small but steady. From the Rising Voices Initiative, I have the email. May I see it? He asked. Ava nodded quickly, fumbling for her phone with trembling fingers. She pulled up the email and handed it to him. He scanned it slowly, very slowly. The room held its breath. When he looked up again, his gaze settled on Harold. She was invited, he said simply. Harold's jaw tightened. That organization does not have final approval authority. The man tilted his head slightly. Actually, he said, they do. Harold's eyes flicked around the room, searching for support. Sir, with all due respect, you're mistaken. The man smiled faintly, not with amusement, but with patience. With all due respect, he replied, I'm not. The moderator stepped forward nervously. Harold, she said, I remember seeing her name on the scheduled draft. Harold cut her off with a glare. This is highly inappropriate, he snapped. Security, please escort this man back to his seat. The guard hesitated again. The man finally turned fully toward Harold, his posture straight, his presence suddenly unmistakable. You won't do that, he said calmly. Harold laughed incredulously. And why not? Because, the man replied, you're about to make this situation much worse than it already is. A hush fell over the room. Ava watched, her breath shallow, her heart racing. The man turned back to her. What's your name? He asked softly. Ava, she said. Ava Robinson, he nodded. Ava, he repeated. You were asked to share your story because your voice matters. Tears welled in her eyes again, different this time. Thank you, she whispered. He turned back to Harold. Now, he said, his tone still measured but firm, I'm going to ask you to apologize to her. A collective gasp rippled through the audience. Harold stared at him in disbelief. Excuse me? You heard me, the man said. Publicly. Harold's face flushed. This is outrageous. You have no authority to demand anything of me. The man studied him for a long moment. You're right, he said slowly. I haven't introduced myself. He reached into his jacket pocket, not for a badge, but for a pair of reading glasses. He slipped them on, glanced briefly at Ava's phone once more, then handed it back to her with a reassuring nod. Hold on to that, he said. Then he turned to face the audience. My name, he said calmly, is Daniel Whitmore. A few people in the room stiffened. Ava didn't recognize the name, but she felt the shift ripple through the space like an electric current. Daniel continued, his voice steady. I'm here today not as a speaker, he said, but as a listener, and what I just witnessed was not leadership, it was abuse. Harold scoffed again, but there was less confidence in it now. This conference prides itself on innovation and inclusion, Daniel went on, yet a woman was publicly shamed for daring to stand on a stage she was invited to. He looked directly at Harold. That's unacceptable. Harold clenched his fists. You're overstepping, Daniel smiled faintly. I don't think so. He gestured gently toward Ava. Would you be willing to stay? He asked her quietly. Just for a moment. Ava hesitated, then nodded. Yes. The guard stepped back, releasing her arm. Daniel turned to the moderator. Please pause the program. The moderator nodded quickly, relieved. The room was silent now, utterly, completely silent. Every eye was fixed on Daniel, on Ava, on Harold. The storm had not yet broken. but the calm standing in the middle of it was unmistakable, and Harold Klein was about to learn that he had gravely misjudged the situation. The silence in the room felt fragile now, like glass stretched too thin. Harold Klein broke it with a sharp, dismissive laugh. "Daniel Whitmore," he said, shaking his head. "I don't care who you are, this event has protocols and you are disrupting them." Daniel didn't react. He simply reached into the inside pocket of his blazer and pulled out a slim, black card holder. A few people in the front rows leaned forward instinctively. Daniel opened it slowly and removed a single card. He didn't wave it around or hold it up dramatically. He walked calmly toward the stage steps and handed it to the moderator. "Please read that," he said. The moderator glanced down. Her eyes widened. Her face drained of color. Looked up at Daniel, then back at the card, then at Harold. "Harold," she said, her voice unsteady. "This is," Harold scoffed. "What is it now?" The moderator swallowed hard. "This is Daniel Whitmore, founder and CEO of Whitmore Global." The name hit the room like a thunderclap. A collective gasp erupted. Chairs shifted violently. Whispers exploded in every corner of the hall. "No way, that Whitmore? He owns half the companies in this room." "He's the keynote sponsor," Ava's breath caught. She stared at Daniel, her mind struggling to catch up. Whitmore Global wasn't just another corporation, it was the corporation. The multinational giant whose funding made this very summit possible. The logo she'd seen plastered across the building that morning suddenly burned in her memory. Harold's face went pale. That's not possible," he stammered. You were supposed to arrive tomorrow." Daniel looked at him calmly. "I changed my schedule." Harold straightened reflexively, panic flickering behind his eyes. "Sir, I didn't recognize you without your badge." Daniel tilted his head slightly. "No," he said evenly, "you didn't recognize her humanity either." The room fell dead silent. Harold opened his mouth, then closed it again, sweat beaded at his temple. "I apologize if there's been a misunderstanding," Harold said quickly. "This was never meant to." "It was meant to," Daniel interrupted. His voice was still calm, but now it carried steel. "You meant every word you said to her, you just didn't expect consequences." Daniel turned to Ava. "Would you mind," he asked gently, "telling them why you were invited to speak?" Ava's hands trembled. Every instinct screamed at her to shrink, to stay silent. But Daniel's eyes were steady, encouraging. She nodded. "I was invited," she said, her voice shaking at first, then growing stronger, "because I spoke at a community forum about caring for my mother while working 2 jobs, about dropping out of school so she wouldn't be alone during chemotherapy, about surviving when the system keeps telling you no." She swallowed. "They said my story was about resilience." A murmur rippled through the crowd, this time different, softer, heavier. Daniel turned back to Harold. "And you decided," he said, "that her story wasn't worthy of this room." Harold shook his head frantically. "No, sir, she didn't fit the profile." "The profile?" Daniel repeated quietly. "Yes, no, I mean—" Daniel raised a hand, stopping him. "Let me be very clear," he said. "Whitmore Global does not fund platforms that humiliate people based on appearance, background, or race." The word race landed with unmistakable weight. Several attendees shifted uncomfortably. Daniel continued, his voice steady but unforgiving. "You embarrassed this woman in front of hundreds of people. You abused your authority, and you did it confidently because you believed no one important was watching." He paused. "You were wrong." Harold's shoulders slumped. "I'm willing to apologize," he said quickly, turning toward Ava. "Miss Robinson, I'm sorry if my words came across as—" "No," Daniel said sharply. The sudden edge in his voice made everyone flinch. "You don't get to minimize this," he said, "and you don't get to apologize only because you were exposed." Daniel turned to the security team. "Please escort Mr. Klein from the building." Harold's head snapped up. "You can't do that." "I can," Daniel replied calmly, "and I am. But I run this event." "You ran it," Daniel corrected. "Effective immediately, you are terminated." A stunned silence followed. Harold's face crumpled. "This is my career," he whispered. Daniel looked at him steadily. So was her moment. The guard stepped forward this time without hesitation. Harold looked around desperately, searching for support, for sympathy. He found none. As he was led away, the room remained silent, not in complicity now, but in reckoning. Daniel waited until the doors closed behind Harold. Then he turned back to Ava. She was shaking, overwhelmed, disbelieving, emotionally spent. "You should have never been treated that way," Daniel said gently. "And for that, I am deeply sorry." Tears streamed freely down Ava's face now. "I didn't know who you were," she whispered. Daniel smiled softly. "That's okay, you treated me with dignity anyway." He gestured toward the stage. If you're willing, he said, I would like you to take the microphone again. Ava froze. The room held its breath. Only if you want to, he added. The choice is yours. Ava looked out at the audience, the same faces that had watched her humiliation in silence. Her heart pounded, then she nodded. Yes, she said, I want to. Applause erupted, loud, sustained, emotional. As Ava stepped back onto the stage, this time with her head held high, the world felt different, because the truth had been revealed, and nothing would ever be the same again. The applause didn't fade quickly this time. It rolled through the auditorium in waves, strong, sustained, and filled with something Ava had rarely experienced in her life: validation. She stood at the center of the stage, the microphone warm in her hands, her heart pounding not with fear now, but with disbelief. Her chest rose and fell as she tried to steady her breathing. Tears blurred her vision, and she didn't bother to wipe them away. For the first time that day, she wasn't ashamed of them. Daniel Whitmore stood a few steps behind her, not looming, not overshadowing, just present, grounded, supportive. When the applause finally softened, Ava leaned toward the microphone. I wasn't sure I'd get to speak today, she said quietly. A few soft chuckles rippled through the room, gentle, empathetic. But I'm grateful, she continued, her voice growing steadier, because what just happened on this stage is part of my story too. The room listened now, truly listened. I come from a place where you learn early to stay quiet, Ava said. Where you learn that being invisible is safer than being seen. I've been judged by how I look where I live, how much money I don't have. She paused, swallowing. Today reminded me of that, but it also reminded me of something else. She turned slightly, looking back at Daniel. That there are people who will stand up when it matters. Daniel nodded once respectfully. Ava faced the audience again. My mother is sick, she said. She's fighting cancer, and there are days I don't know how we'll make it through, but I get up anyway. I keep going, because resilience isn't about being strong all the time. Her voice trembled. It's about not giving up when you're tired of being brave. The room was silent, fully, reverently silent. When Ava finished, there was no hesitation this time. The applause exploded. People stood to their feet, clapping, some wiping their eyes. The sound filled the space, not polite or performative, but raw and sincere. Ava stepped back, overwhelmed. Daniel joined her at the podium. Thank you, Ava, he said into the microphone. That took courage. He turned to face the audience. What happened today, he continued, cannot be undone, but it can be answered. He gestured toward the moderator and the event organizers. An internal review will begin immediately, not tomorrow, today, and we will make our findings public. A murmur of approval rippled through the crowd. Daniel's voice softened as he turned back to Ava. There's something else, he said. Ava looked at him, uncertain. You mentioned your mother, he said gently, and her treatment. Ava's heart skipped. Yes. Daniel nodded. I'd like to help. Ava shook her head instinctively. I didn't come here for that. I know, Daniel said kindly. That's why I'm offering. He addressed the room again. Whitmore Global will cover the full cost of Lillian Robinson's medical care, past, present, and future. A collective gasp swept through the audience. Ava's knees nearly gave out. What? She whispered. Daniel met her eyes. Every prescription, every treatment, no paperwork battles, no deadlines. Tears streamed down Ava's face as she covered her mouth with her hand. And that's not all, Daniel continued. Ava, you sacrificed your education to care for your family. If you wish to return to school, Whitmore Global will fund your education in full, tuition, housing, and living expenses. The room erupted again. Ava shook her head, sobbing now. I don't know what to say. You don't have to say anything, Daniel replied softly. Just let us walk with you for a while. He paused, then added, and finally, effective immediately, we are offering Ava a paid fellowship with our Community Impact Division, a position designed not to change her voice, but to amplify it. Ava sank into the chair behind her, overwhelmed by the weight of it all. This doesn't feel real, she whispered. Daniel crouched slightly so he was at eye level with her. It is, he said, and you've earned it by being exactly who you are. Later that afternoon, after the crowd dispersed and the cameras stopped recording, Ava sat in a quiet conference room with Daniel and a representative from the nonprofit who had invited her. Her phone buzzed. A text from her mother. How did it go? Ava laughed through tears as she typed back. Mom, we're going to be okay. Her phone rang almost immediately. Ava, Lillian's voice trembled. What do you mean? Ava smiled, her voice breaking with joy. I mean you don't have to worry anymore. Daniel watched quietly as Ava explained everything, her voice rising and falling with emotion, her hands shaking, her laughter mixing with tears. When she hung up, she pressed the phone to her chest. I don't know how to thank you, she said. Daniel shook his head. You don't owe me gratitude, you owe yourself belief. Outside the room, Harold Klein's name was already being removed from the event website. Emails were being sent, statements drafted, consequences unfolding swiftly and publicly. There was no escaping accountability. But inside that quiet room, something else was happening. Healing. Ava leaned back in her chair, exhausted but lighter than she'd felt in years. For the first time in a long time, the future didn't feel like a threat. It felt like a promise. 5 years later, the morning sun poured gently through wide windows, spilling across polished hardwood floors and walls lined with books, real books collected slowly and lovingly over time. The air smelled like fresh coffee and blooming jasmine drifting in from the balcony. Ava Robinson stood in the kitchen of her home, barefoot, smiling as she poured tea into 2 mugs. "Mom," she called softly, "your favorite." Lillian Robinson walked in from the balcony, her steps unhurried, her posture strong. Her hair was shorter now, touched with silver, but her face was full, healthy, glowing in a way Ava once feared she might never see again. "Still spoiling me," Lillian teased, accepting the mug. Ava laughed. Some things don't change, but everything else had. The apartment above the abandoned laundromat was a memory now, one Ava carried with gratitude, not shame. In its place stood a warm, peaceful home filled with light and quiet joy. On the wall near the dining table hung a framed photograph from the conference years ago. Ava stood at the podium mid-sentence, her expression fierce and alive. Beneath it was a simple plaque, "Your voice matters." Ava glanced at it every morning, not as a reminder of pain, but of purpose. She had returned to school the following year, completing her degree in social policy while working with Whitmore Global's Community Impact Division. What began as a fellowship had grown into leadership, not the kind that demanded silence, but the kind that made room. She now directed a national program that partnered with grassroots organizations, identifying unheard voices and placing them on platforms where decisions were made. And she never forgot what it felt like to be dismissed. Later that day, Ava stood backstage at a community auditorium, not nearly as grand as the summit from years before, but far more meaningful to her. The room buzzed with energy. Young women sat in the front rows, some clutching notebooks, others nervously smoothing their clothes. Ava peeked through the curtain, her heart warm. 5 minutes, a volunteer whispered. Ava nodded. As she waited, her phone vibrated, a message from Daniel Whitmore, "Proud of you. Always." Ava smiled and typed back, "I learned from the best." The host announced her name. The applause that followed was eager, genuine. Ava stepped onto the stage, not with fear this time, but with confidence rooted in truth. She scanned the audience and began. "Once," she said, "I was removed from a stage because someone decided I didn't belong there." The room went quiet. "But I learned something important that day," she continued. "Belonging isn't something others get to grant you, it's something you claim by refusing to disappear." She spoke for an hour about dignity, compassion, accountability, and the quiet power of standing up when it's easier to stay seated. When she finished, the applause was thunderous. Back at home that evening, Ava and her mother sat together on the couch, watching the sunset paint the sky in shades of gold and violet. "You changed a lot of lives," Lillian said softly. Ava shook her head. "Someone changed mine first." Lillian squeezed her hand. "And you chose to pass it on." Ava nodded, because that was the lesson. That kindness isn't small. That silence can wound as deeply as cruelty. And that one act of compassion at the right moment can rewrite a future. Moral: never judge a person before hearing their story. The courage to stand up for someone else may become the moment that saves a life, including your own. If this story moved you, please like this video, share it with someone who needs hope today, and subscribe to the channel for more powerful, inspirational stories that remind us what humanity can be at its best. Because voices like Ava's are everywhere. They're just waiting for someone to listen.